Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Gear Priority Podcast. I'm your host, Justin. Today, we're talking all about tents and trying to figure out what the best backpacking tents for 2023 are. I'm joined by Steven, who you may know from the MyLifeOutdoors YouTube channel. Steven might be one of the biggest gear nerds that I know, but he backs it up with having tried a lot of tents. Welcome, Steven. How's it going, buddy? And how many tents have you probably tried ever? Do you have a number off the top of your head?
Oh my goodness. I think tents, out of all the backpacking gear, tents to me are the coolest piece of gear. And so I really like tents. I like trying new tents. And I don't know how many tents I've tried, but I've got a pretty big stack sitting in my gear closet of at least 30, maybe 40 tents. I don't know that that's an exaggeration, but it might be getting close to an exaggeration. So I've got a lot of tents.
Nice. So you're kind of the perfect person to bring on. I don't think I've seen any other channels talk about as many tents or tents in as much detail. And I even think of like the gear review websites like Gear Junkie and stuff. I know they kind of pass their gear around to multiple writers and things like that. So you don't really have one person testing out such a broad range of tents. So yeah, pretty cool that you get to test out so many. And I think I'm probably up there as well. I think you, me, and Devin with Backcountry Exposure probably have some of the most tent experience. But before we get kind of dive into the topic and try to figure out what the best tents are, just want to do some rapid fire questions just for people probably know you're a pretty open book. You've done some live streams, but just to get some more little details out there about Steven. So the first question: what's the coolest piece of gear that you've used in the last 3 months?
Oh goodness, you're not gonna let me think about that before you ask me?
No, just whatever pops off the top of your head.
All right, so I've been thinking about tents, trying to get ready for this podcast, and so it's gonna be hard to think about things that aren't tents. Coolest piece of gear. Oh my goodness, yeah, I don't even know. So I mean, because tents are on my mind, I'm gonna talk about the Tarp Tent Dipole LI, because that's the coolest tent that I've used most recently, and it's the only thing that's coming to my mind right now. But it is a really cool, kind of different than anything else out there on the market kind of tent. And so, but I'll save that when we start talking about tents here in a minute.
This I'm kind of revealing some of your secrets that came about from we spent a whole week together. But how many servings of Coca-Cola do you consume a day?
I just had one right before we started. And so, well, see, because I don't drink coffee. And so, I mean, it is my source of caffeine. So, I mean, I would say, what is a serving? Like 8 ounces. So this is 8 ounces. And so that's probably, I would say at least four or five of these in the day. So I have a Coke almost at every single meal. And then I have, and these are kind of like my snack Cokes. Cause this is something that you're talking about being nerdy. Glass transfers the least amount of flavor into whatever beverage it is that you are drinking. So aluminum transfers flavor, plastic transfers flavor, everything else that they package drinks in transfers flavor, but glass doesn't. And so if you want the purest drink that you can get it in a glass bottle, and it's also the most recyclable. So
it's a good point. I feel like you could do an entire podcast episode or entire channel on Coke and everything that's involved. I know we spent a good amount of time going over it when we were in a car together for hours on end.
Well, and that, I mean, so like in the backcountry, that's the thing that I crave the most. Like as soon as I get out, I want a Coke, and I usually when I go someplace it's got free refills so that I can get as many as I possibly can out of that.
Yeah. After the last trip, I think we went to a burger joint, and you're kind of like, do you think they'll give me a free refill off this? And
That's exactly right. And it never hurts to ask.
Third question. This will be the last one, but I've been asking everyone: toilet paper or bidet?
I have never used a bidet. Not even an indoor bidet, much less a backcountry bidet. And so I am a toilet paper person.
Are you bidet curious at all?
I mean, I'm not super bidet curious, and especially for the backcountry. I don't know why. There's something about a backcountry bidet that I'm just like, that seems like it's going to introduce a lot of, I don't know, uncleanliness I mean, you're already very unclean when you're backpacking, but it seems like backcountry bidet, like spraying water and splashing and onto you, your hand, your bottle, all that kind of stuff. I feel like toilet paper gives me kind of that barrier, between me and the nastiness. And so I prefer toilet paper.
My goal in 2023 is to convince everyone I know, including you, to try a backcountry bidet. I think that the issue that people run into with them is they get the bidets with the attachments, or it has like a really thin, powerful stream, and then they blast it at their butthole, and it just creates like a poo explosion. And like you said, I think things go everywhere. The key is to like just introduce water and then use it kind of like a shower type system, and then have some soap in there, and then it's just like having a little shower for your butt, and you come away feeling real nice.
Well, there is one way that I think you could convince me to try a backcountry bidet. I've asked you for a big favor recently, and I feel like trying the backcountry bidet would be a very small price to pay if you if you do that favor for me.
It's a good point. You have to videotape the entire process, though. That'll be part of the deal.
You want a tape of me using the bidet? I mean, I did put my bare butt on a thumbnail recently, but
I know, that was amazing. All right, so let's jump into tents. I think that's what the people are here for. Kind of. They're here for your beautiful beard mostly, I think. But I I think you kind of are like you mentioned already that you find tents one of the most interesting things. I think for me, I like talking about sleeping pads the most, then probably packs, and then tents. So my question for you was gonna be like, where do tents land for you? So they're kind of like right at the top as far as like the piece of gear you're interested in. Why is that?
I don't know. I mean, I guess if you really think about it critically, like you can't backpack without a backpack. So maybe that should be the most important piece of gear. But for me, like the tent is the hub for backpacking, because that's the main thing. The reason why you're carrying a backpack, I mean, unless you're doing day hikes, and you got a small backpack, but the reason why you're carrying a backpack is because you're trying to go and spend the night. And so unless you're going to cowboy camp, or you're going to use a bivvy or a tarp or something like that, which I feel like is most people are not going to be doing that. It's kind of more advanced backpacking. You've been doing it for a while and you're curious about other, alternatives to tents. Tents are kind of like the one thing. You got to have that tent if you're going to be spending the night outdoors. And you could argue you got to have the other things too, but the tent is your home. It's your base. It's your, it's what you come back to. It's usually the first thing you set up when you get to camp, other than a chair because you just want to rest your legs for a little bit. But the tent just, I don't know, it's neat to me. It's the biggest piece of gear you got. A lot of times it's the most expensive piece of gear you got. And so I like tents.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a lot of cool technologies that go into them too. And it's interesting. Like I feel like with packs, a lot of packs you have a pack, they're all going to be kind of relatively the same. Whereas you get a lot of differences in tents. And I think like even just going from like trekking pole to freestanding tents, there's a lot of debate about that, and people have pretty insane preferences for one or the other. With that, do you have a bias towards trekking pole tents or freestanding?
Yeah, so so I was traditional freestanding tents for a very long time, and it took me many years before I ever would try a trekking pole tent. But that being said, like I like light tents. I tend to pack heavier sleep systems because I want to be comfortable. But the tent, I feel like you can still make the tent perform and do what it needs to do, what it's designed to do, while also keeping it light. Whereas with sleep systems, I feel like that's a little bit more difficult to do. It's more difficult to stay comfortable and be light. But with a tent, you can be light and you can still be comfortable. And so with that, like I tend to gravitate towards trekking pole tents a little bit more, just because they get so light. And even because I'm not a trekking pole person, like I don't carry trekking poles. But even with, trekking pole alternatives, or carrying, like if you're carrying carbon fiber poles and things like that, trekking pole tents still end up lighter. Even when you calculate in, because most people don't calculate trekking poles, they don't calculate the stakes and stuff like that. But even calculating those things in, you still end up lighter with more room. And so, so I tend to gravitate towards trekking pole tents a little bit more. But like I've got a big trip planned here pretty soon, and I've got a traditional tent that I'm taking because I'm expecting a lot of rain. And for some reason, with me, I just feel like I want the ease of a traditional tent when I'm setting up in the rain and all that kind of stuff. So, I mean, but we could get into, I don't know, nuanced differences there too. So,
Yeah, that's an interesting. I made a pretty bold statement last year. It was kind of in frustration, but it was, I will never use a tent that doesn't have a fly first pitch ability or doesn't have an all-in-one pitch ability. So you have the tents like the X-Mid tent and a lot of the trekking pole tents, everything, the inner and the fly all go up at the same time. And then you have tents where you can pitch the fly first and then pitch the inner mesh inside of it, kind of like crawling around inside the fly so that the inner tent doesn't get all wet. And that's based off of using the MSR Freelight. I'm going to throw that tent under the bus real hard, probably on this podcast. And I have a couple of videos coming out where I just trash it, but
I've been pretty mean to the Freelight also.
Yeah, it was just one of those things where it's like, did anyone test this tent out in the backcountry and in any rain? Like it's an okay tent for someone who just wants a lightweight tent for perfect conditions, but after that it runs into a lot of problems really quickly. And I was trying to set it up in the rain and the entire inner tent got drenched. And then you run into the issues of like the fly not covering the doors well. Then you have rain coming inside as you try and get out and the door dumping water in. After that experience, I was like, okay, I'm never using a tent that doesn't have fly first or,
Yeah, and so I was thinking about that too, because I figured that this would come out whenever we were talking about tents. And I was trying to think why for this trip did I gravitate towards a traditional tent? Because you're right, traditional tents don't typically go fly first. It's much more difficult to do fly first. And I think what it was is it wasn't just the rain, it was the wind that I was concerned about. And even then, like I'm questioning my rationale on it, because like pyramid style trekking pole tents tend to shed wind better, and they tend to pitch all together, or they pitch fly first more easily, but they rely very heavily on stakes. And when you're in soft ground, which I'm expecting to have a lot of sand where I'm going, I've had issues with the wind pulling stakes, even when you put them in, because you're supposed to put them in, like an angle, with the head facing away from the tent and all that kind of stuff. Even with that, like I've had tents pull that stake vertical in the ground, and you got to go out there and you got to make sure that you got the stake in real good. So if you got good solid ground where you can get good stakes in there, then I don't worry as much about trekking pole tents, because they rely so heavily on stakes. But for this trip, knowing that there's going to be a lot of sand, believing that there's going to be a lot of wind and or rain, I like the security that a traditional freestanding tent kind of gives me there.
That makes sense. Which tent are you bringing on that trip?
So this is the other thing, that I'm doing something that I said I would never do, and I've got the brand new Hornet 3-person tent, which the Hornets never had a 3-person. The Nemo Hornets never had a 3-person before, and I set it up, and it's just huge. And so it's me and a buddy, and I asked him, I was like, you want 2 tents or one? And he was like, because he hasn't gone a whole lot, he's like, I think I want to have 1 tent, just so I kind of have like that added security. And so I was like, all right, so what tent are we going to take? And just having like done a little bit of like preliminary type review and stuff like that with the Hornet 3-person, I'm like, man, this really is. And that's the thing. It's like, I know that everyone says, like 3-person are really 2-person and 2-person is really 1-person. And I really want to push against that, because I don't feel like we should be giving in to companies and letting them say that that's just the way it's going to be. I'm like, call it what it is, And if it's a 2-person tent, then it needs to really be able to accommodate 2 people comfortably. And, and if you watch my channel much at all, I talk all the time about 20-inch pads and 25-inch pads and all that kind of stuff. And so the Hornet 3-person, it's got like a 60-inch floor or something like that, And so not only am I going to get 2 25-inch pads in there, but we're going to have all kinds of room, to get away from one another. And so that's That's what I'm taking, and it does not pitch fly first, and it's not even fully freestanding. And so maybe I shouldn't be taking that tent, but it's what I've chosen. So
I think you're onto something with pushing back on companies. I think these days, the majority of people are probably using 25-inch pads and using thicker pads. And I think we've seen a little bit of an arms race with the thickness of sleeping pads, but the sleeping pads of tent manufacturers haven't kept up with what people are using with sleep systems. And I think hopefully that does catch up. You have some people who are taking that into account when they're designing tents, but for the most part, like a two-person tent can't accommodate two 25-inch wide pads, and that's
no, and it's the worst with ultralight trekking pole tents. Like there's barely any ultralight trekking pole tents that have a full 50-inch floor. And so like the regular X Mid does, I know that does. The Dipole does. Those are some that I'm aware of. But all the other like, mainstream trekking pole ultralight tents, they're all like 40, 42 inch, stuff like that. And I'm just like, and the only thing I can figure is because I feel like, Justin, maybe you're more a diehard ultralight than I am, but I guess what the companies are thinking is that like the true ultralight people that want an ultralight tent are going to be out there on 20-inch pads so they can save, all that extra weight and all that kind of. They're going to be on 20-inch, mummy-shaped tapered pads, and maybe that's true. But for me, I'm just like I don't want to have anything to do with that, but I want to have everything to do with an ultralight tent. And so maybe I'm an anomaly. I don't know.
you're probably right. I think that's what's going through their mind. Like Z-Packs, I think the duplex, which is a two-person tent, is like 42 inches wide, so it can accommodate two 20-inch wide pads. And when I'm trying to go as ultralight as possible, and I'll bring a 20-inch pad, but I don't go that ultralight with sacrificing comfort, like by bringing a 20-inch pad. If I'm going on a long trip, if I was going on a through hike or and that's, I think a lot of the duplex users, there are a lot of duplex users on through hikes. It's the most popular tent on the PCT and CDT, but most people are using it as a one-person tent because it's going to accommodate a 25-inch pad, and that's what a lot of people are using. I think the true ultralighters, I don't think there's that many true ultralighters that are going 20-inch, especially with how light like the X-Lite is these days, even in the 20, like the regular wide version and everything like that. So yeah, I think hopefully I did hear that with tent manufacturing and the way that Dyneema fabric is cut, it's very difficult to make like a 50 plus inch wide tent just because of the way the panels go together. And I remember talking with Dan Durst, that's what he said. It was actually a manufacturing limitation for the X-Mid Pro. And I'm really hoping I'm getting that right. Dan will probably comment if it's wrong.
Well, see, I'm going to push back on that because the X-Mid Pro's got a nylon floor, so that doesn't make sense.
But maybe for the panels of the wools.
Yeah, I don't know about that. I mean, because the panels, maybe like you get a couple extra inches on the panels, although I don't know, because it is at an angle. And so like there's no way I'm going to do geometry in my head, but maybe it does take that much more inches to get a couple inches on the floor because you got to extend, whatever, triangulate, all that kind of stuff. So maybe, I don't know, maybe so, but I always thought it's because of weight.
I might be wrong on that, or it might have been something that he was talking about when that design still used before he transitioned to the design having a polyester floor, or nylon floor, whatever it is. So I don't know. I'll have to ask him. I'll bring him back. He's the first episode on the podcast here, and I'll bring him back on and get him to talk about some of those design considerations.
Yeah, but I am sure that he'll probably chime in on the comments and let us know. So
he's probably already like, his ears burn as soon as the word X-Mid gets mentioned anywhere in the world.
Yeah, the podcast isn't even published yet, but he's already commenting right now. So
I feel like we've done our due diligence talking about the X-Mid already. On like we're not going to have the people chiming in and saying like, what about the X-Mid? Talk about the X-Mid. That's I love you guys, the viewers and the podcast listeners and everybody out there. But it's pretty hilarious. I find it hilarious where every time I talk about any product, if it's a tent, especially if I don't mention the X-Mid or compare it to the X-Mid in some way, I always get a comment asking how it compares to the X-Mid, or why didn't I bring the X-Mid, or how, like, the X-Mid users are diehards.
Well, and that's, not to talk about too much about the X-Mid, but like I've never used a regular X-Mid. Like I've never seen one in person. Well, that's not true. I did do a hike with Dan Becker, and he had a regular X-Mid one. But other than that, like I've never seen one. I've never used one. And I know that some of my complaints that I have about the Pro Series is not true about the regular X-Mid. And so like, I guess I really just need to get my hands on a regular X-Mid so that I have that experience when I'm talking about it.
They're pretty good. I've the regular X-Mid 2-person, and it's kind of like my go-to ultralight tent when Steph and I are going on trips, or if it's gonna be rainy and I just want a ton of space. I really enjoy that. I did have some problems with the one corner where the walls are a steeper angle. I had the tent stake pull out just because it's getting a lot more load on it than the more angled walls. But I think you can just put a rock on that, and hopefully that satisfies that. But and maybe we'll just keep rolling with X-Mids on this. But I did want to go through some superlatives for tents. And this will trigger the one about the X-Mids for sure, as we kind of go through kind of the best budget tent, ultralight tent, beginner tent. I think a lot of people might argue all three of those categories, the X-Mid could take the cake. But even things like the most innovative tent, and maybe we can get controversial with the most overrated tent as well in there. But starting off with the best budget tent. Let's try and give out the award for best budget tent here. What do you have on your list? Yeah.
Okay, so I mean, it depends on if you're talking traditional or you're talking, a trekking pole tent. And so, like a trekking pole tent, it's really difficult to beat the Lanshan. It's just the price and all that. Like I actually saw, I got a email yesterday, Featherstone, which is not as well of a known brand, but I've used their quilts and I've talked about their quilts several times. And so they contacted me. They've got a new trekking pole tent coming out that is the same price as the Lanshan, what is the 2? Do you know what the 2 costs, the Lanshan 2?
I think it's not much more, probably around $150 US, kind of when it's at its lowest price. It kind of bounces around up to $200 US, I think. But
yeah, so this is a 2-person, and I haven't used it yet. Like it's just now coming out. I think it's 170 or something like that. But it still doesn't touch the weight of the Lanshan. And so like for lightweight trekking pole, Lanshan is probably going to be the hardest to beat. But then when you're talking about traditional tents, I've had good experiences with Nature Hike, which is, I always think that's the worst possible name for a camping brand. It's like they're like, well, like what do campers like? They like nature and they like to hike, so let's put them together. But their tents really aren't that bad. The thing that I don't like about them is they're basically clones of more popular, more established mainstream brands that have done the hard work to research and develop these tents, and then they just went and they copied them, made them cheaper. But I also realized that for some people, like they can't worry about that just because money is too much of an issue. And so if you've got the money, I would rather you buy from the brands that are actually doing the hard work to innovate in these areas. But if you can't, like if that's just too big of a hindrance, then I feel like the Nature Hikes and stuff like that, they make really good tents. And then I've never tried Pariah. Is it Pariah? I know it's after the river in Utah, but I don't know how to say it.
I was corrected in how I pronounce it last time I made a video, but I forget what the actual pronunciation.
Is it Paria? It's not Paria, is it?
Maybe. Yeah, I'm not sure.
They know what we're talking about. I've never tried one of their tents, mainly because every time I've tried to get one, they're sold out. But I understand that they have really good quality, not cheap, but affordable tent.
Yeah, exactly. And I think you got the 2 that I like, the probably the same ones that I have on my list. The Lanshan, hard to not recommend that one as the best budget. I think that with the Nature Hike, the Mongar 2 is basically a Hubba clone. And you bring up a good point about some of these more budget friendly companies are essentially copying. Like the Mongar 2 is a previous version, Hubba almost exactly, which I don't really agree with that. Some people might say the Lanshan's a clone of things like the Six Moon Designs that are solo, but I think it's different enough, and they iterated and kind of innovated in different ways that it's far enough away from that tent. And I'm all about companies copying each other. if they're improving the product, but don't copy and then not improve at the same time. That's
Because that's the thing. I mean, like, as you start looking at tents, I mean, like, there's a big difference, obviously, in trekking pole and traditional tents. But when you start looking at tents, I mean, they're all very similar. You know, I mean, like, basic designs, basic pole placements, things like that. You know, I mean, they're all very, very similar. And so it's really hard to find a tent that is just drastically different than all the others.
Yeah, it's almost impossible. I think the X-Mid was the first one that came out with a design that no one had. Well, I guess the Sierra Designs had already put out a tent that was very similar, so slightly different, but had the offset pole structure and everything like that.
And I haven't ever gotten my hands on the Sierra Designs, but I'm curious about it. I don't think it has the vestibules quite the same way that the X-Mid does. Am I?
You're right. Yeah. So Dan used the vestibules of the X-Mid in order to create enough tension to keep the poles upright, whereas the Sierra Designs version, it has to use guy lines coming off of the poles in order to keep the poles upright. It just doesn't have enough like structure from the fly. So but I think that one was designed with Andrew Skirka. Everyone's always building off of everyone else, and Dan took that design and then made it better, and now is one of the most popular tents out there. So I think.
Yeah, and I do think that has to happen. I think you have to be able to take other designs and improve on them in order for the industry to move forward. It's when you make an exact copy, you know, of a tent that I'm like,
and that's where hopefully patents come into play and everything like that. But it's tough when things are being made in another country that really doesn't obey patents at all.
Right, exactly.
All right, second superlative, best ultralight tent. And this is probably going to be a trekking pole tent, I'm going to guess, for you.
Yeah, the trekking pole tent. I mean, like, if you're talking ultralight, I mean, if that's what you're going for, if you're going for the lightest tent that you can get, I mean, it's really hard to beat the Plex Solo. You know, I mean, 14 ounces. They advertise, I think it's under 14 ounces. Mine, I weighed it one time and it's 13.7, but then I weighed it again the other day and it was like 14.3 or something like that. And so, I mean, I have variations, who knows, you know, like maybe dirt and stuff that I've gotten on the tent, maybe made it a little bit heavier. But I mean, it's just really hard to beat that tent. But then you've also got, not to keep bringing up the X-Mid, but the X-Mid has gotten really close to that and made some improvements. I feel like the X-Mid 1 has made some improvements over the Plex Solo. You know, some of the things that I don't like about the Plex, but I take it anyways because of how light it is. The X-Mid fixes that. But then, so like I was messing around the other day and I saw that the Gossamer Gear, the 1, has a DCF version that I didn't even realize they had made. Of course, it's not available right now. I don't know if they've like discontinued it or what, but part of me saw that and was like, how did I not know about this before? And so, I mean, that gets right down there into the same weight category as the X-Mid 1, and it starts getting close to the Plex Solo, and that's a really, the 1 is a different tent, I feel like, than a lot of the other tents. I mean, you see most of the trekking pole tents are kind of like that Hexamid style tent, but the 1 gets to be a little bit different, kind of like the X-Mid gets to be a little bit different, and those are some light tents.
Like I personally use the Plex Solo the most. The reason why I haven't especially with the one person ultralight tents that use 2 poles, like with the X-Mid Pro, I just really don't like the idea of having to use two trekking poles. And I don't know if it's just like a weird kind of mental block or what with it. I do find it a lot easier to pitch a 1 pole trekking pole tent than a 2 pole trekking pole tent, and as well as I like the idea of if one of my poles breaks, I don't have to be like scrounging for sticks. Do you have because you don't use trekking poles, do you find that's a big reason why you might be leaning towards the Plex Solo?
Well, I mean, certainly, yeah, because then I have to carry 1 carbon fiber pole, you know, with me when I'm going, so it brings my overall weight even further down, you know. But I mean, even then, so like I said earlier, I'm not a diehard ultralight where I wouldn't carry a second carbon fiber pole that weighs, I don't know, what do they weigh, like 2 ounces or something like that at most. You know, like I would carry that if, you know, for whatever reason, you know, if I had a tent that needed it. But yeah, so I would gravitate towards a single pole tent if I was just like picking for me and not like I need to get some time in this tent so I can talk about it and have some experience with it. I would probably gravitate towards a single pole tent like the Plex Solo, which several times last year when I didn't have tents that I needed to test, that was a tent that I always went for. So, but here's a question I have for you that maybe is off a little bit. So if you had a trekking pole break, let's say that you had a 2-pole tent like the one from Gossamer Gear, and you had a tent break, would you go grab a stick somewhere out of the woods to try to make it work?
I've had that happen. Well, I didn't have a trekking pole break. I had 2 trekking poles and a 1-pole trekking pole at a tent. I had the Lanshan, and I was doing some scrambling, and I had my trekking poles on my pack, and they fell off my pack as I was hiking.
So you just lost them? Like they're just gone?
They're just gone. So I lost both my trekking poles in the middle of the Canadian Rockies that was day 1. So for the next 2 days on the trip, I didn't have trekking poles. So the 2 nights afterwards, I went and scrounged a stick, and I measured them with my arms to see if that seemed to be about the right length. And yeah, I used a stick, and then so on the first night, the stick wasn't quite tall enough, so I had to be sliding rocks underneath just to kind of bring it up to the right height. And it was a pain. And maybe I have a little bit of, now that you bring it up, maybe I have a little bit of trauma from that trip and having to spend so much time in in the rain. And yeah.
So was that your Great Divide trip?
That was a different trip. That was on a trail called the Sawback Trail in the Canadian Rockies.
Okay, because I've watched a lot of the episodes from your Great Divide trip, and I was like, I do not remember that, but it's been a year or so now. So
yeah, luckily that trip on the Great Divide Trail, I hung on to both my poles the whole time.
That's good.
And I've never had a pole break on me, so it's kind of like would that actually happen? But it's almost broke on me. I know people who have had their poles break on them, so it's not like it's something that doesn't happen.
I haven't had a trekking pole break, but I have had a tent pole break. And it was on the Sea to Summit, what is it called? It starts with a T, it's like Trellos or something like that. The Sea to Summit Trellos. I had it break on me in Big Bend National Park when I was hiking with Dan Becker. We had really high winds come in. And he, ironically, was in the X-Mid 1, and I was in the Sea to Summit tent. And it's just like, the walls were bending and all that kind of stuff. And when we set up the tents, because you're always supposed to kind of like place them strategically into the wind, which I rarely ever do. But that's what you're supposed to do. That's best practices. But when we went to bed, there was no wind, and it just came in the middle of the night. And so I don't know anyone that would get up and reposition their tent in the middle of the night to face into the wind, because that seems like a good way to lose your tent altogether. But so it was just bending, and then the main pole that goes up and over the tent just snapped in the middle of the night, just a little loud pop. And so then I had to get up and get my pole repair sleeve and feed it into it. And so it's windy, I'm hanging onto the fly, the tent is basically collapsed there on the ground, and I'm trying to figure out how to get this pole repair sleeve onto it. And it was past a knuckle bend in the pole design, and I could not get it past that knuckle bend. And now I know, having talked to Sea to Summit about it, that you can just unscrew the little grommets not grommets or whatever, the little end pieces of the tent pole, and unhook the elastic, that goes to the poles, and then you can just slide it on in there. But in the middle of the night in the wind, that was not coming to my mind at all. And so I ended up cutting it with a knife. And so then I had this tent for the rest of my trip, because it was the very first night. So I had this tent for the rest of my trip that had no elastic cord, and the poles were all in pieces, and it was like a puzzle every night when I tried to put it together. And then one of the pieces was broken, and so not only in that I had to figure out what order the poles go in, but then I had to figure out where the pole sleeve would go and all that kind of stuff, and it was quite the ordeal.
Did it puncture the tent at all, or?
It did, yeah. Yeah, so when it snapped, it stuck straight through the rainfly. I punched 2 holes in it, and so it must have blown up and then come back in and punched again. And so luckily I had some Gear Aid tenacious tape, and I put that on it the next morning, and it was good to go. But we never really saw any rain on that trip. It was just wind, and so I don't know how that would have done with the rain. But then I also sent the tent back to Sea to Summit, and they repaired it for me.
Nice. Yeah, they have a good warranty. I've always appreciated the warranty that they've given me on stuff, and yeah, I've had that happen too, where a tent pole has broken. Luckily, it wasn't in the middle of the night. Someone just stepped on their tent pole, and luckily I had one of those repair kits. And if people are using regular standard tents with tent poles, like having those repair tubes is pretty essential. And I know a lot of people probably leave those at home, especially if they're using different tent stakes, because it's usually just tucked in the tent stake bag there. But yeah, I don't looking at the Telos tent, it doesn't look like the most wind worthy tent out there. It's just a big box kind of.
No, probably not. Which makes me think again about about my my Hornet 3-person I'm taking, because it's got, I mean, because those tents, they all have like the cross beam, you know, they come across, and I feel like that's kind of the weak spot for wind on those tents, because they just can't handle the. I mean, you got to stake them out really good if you're going to have a tent like that. And so that makes me question again if I'm making the right choice with my Hornet 3-person, expecting some wind and rain on my next trip.
I think you just go for it. Dan had a sketchy encounter on one of his most recent trips. I almost died on my most recent trip. I think you're due. You're due to join the.
I tell you what though, after Dan's video, I bought rescue insurance, and so I now have rescue insurance where I think it's up to $1 million. I can be rescued for $1 million anywhere in the world now.
Nice.
As a result of Dan's video, because talking to him about that experience. So that's a free plug. I'm not even getting paid for that. So
I think I'll have to have Dan on here and ask him about that experience, because I think he was saying it'd be tens of thousands of dollars to get rescued, which I was kind of surprised at. I thought most of the U.S., other than like a few spots like New Hampshire, live free or die, or you get free rescue. So
well, so and I actually think it depends. Well, I know it depends on the area, but I think the reason why the Grand Canyon isn't that way is because they probably do more rescues than any other national park in the United States, and so they probably were like, you know, at the beginning they're like, well, we don't want to make them pay for it, you know, we just want to make sure we get everybody safe. But after they did several, and I know they've done several for people that didn't really need to be rescued, you know, like I read a story one time about a Boy Scout group that just kept calling emergency rescue because their water tasted salty to them. And so they would call emergency rescue, and then like they would come in and they would like give them like gallons of water and be like, are you okay? And they're like, we're okay. And then they would leave, and then they would call them again. And I can't remember all the reasons why they called them, but after the third time, they just evacuated them, like by helicopter. They're like, you can't stay in the Grand Canyon anymore because you just keep calling us out here.
Yeah, you just it's cheaper for us just to fly you out of here.
Right, exactly. And I think that's the deal. Is I think the Grand Canyon does so many rescues that they were just like, we can't continue to pay for this. And so, but if you go someplace where they don't do a whole lot of rescues, I think there's, you know, organizations and people out there, they're like, we want to make sure that people are just safe. So
yeah, kind of like I know in the Canadian Rockies here by Calgary, it's still free, kind of pretty much no matter what. And they're doing about, in the busy times of summer, about 3 rescues a day from the mountains. And I think during the first summer of COVID, they hit record where they're doing like 12 rescues every weekend, and then another like handful of rescues throughout the week. And it was just crazy. And hopefully it continues to be free, because I don't like the idea of having to pay for it.
In Canada, is it provided by the government?
It's subsidized by the government. It's all volunteers on the search and rescue teams. And then I think the government, as well as like donations and things like that, help pay for like the fuel costs and like the helicopter pilots, because they use private helicopter companies in order to get the search and rescue volunteers to the locations. So they're good though. I see their training videos and stuff on Instagram, and there's some pros out there. So I'm glad they're a 30-minute helicopter ride from most of the places I am in the Rockies here. All right, let's go on to the next. This is an interesting superlative, I think, and I'm gonna kind of expand on it, but it's the best beginner tent. But I'm gonna kind of caveat that in, like, if you had a friend who had never backpacked before and they're like, I wanna buy a tent, I know I'm gonna get into this, or if they've gone a couple times and they know they love it, they've rented and borrowed a bit. What would you recommend them get? I know it depends a lot on kind of like what their preferences are as far as like weight versus size, but if it's going to be someone who sometimes going solo, sometimes going with someone else,
Yeah, so I don't know that I have like a specific tent that I'd recommend. Whenever I looked at that and the stuff that you sent me ahead of time so I could prepare, I thought traditional is what I'd recommend for a beginner, just because, I mean, like I've set up a lot of trekking pole tents, but they still, like, if you get like a little bit of uneven ground, I mean, like trekking pole tents, they want completely flat surface for them to work properly, and you rarely find that. And so when you get them on, weird, uneven ground, I mean, they don't want to pitch properly. And so you got to be able to, like, mess with that and figure that out and be willing to, move a stake or even start completely over. And so for that reason, I was going to say the traditional tent is what I would recommend for a beginner. And I feel like once you've gone out, several times and you use the traditional tent and you start to feel more confident in your ability to solve problems and stuff out there, then I think you could probably go to a trekking pole tent without much problem. And I think, because probably the number one person I think that would probably be in that situation is probably a first time through hiker, that has decided I want to through hike a trail but doesn't have a whole lot of backpacking experience prior to that. Then I might say, go with a trekking pole tent so you can save that weight, and have that, so you're not carrying all that extra weight. Because I think if you didn't, I think you'd probably be ditching, a 4-pound traditional tent somewhere down the road, just because you don't want to carry it anymore. But yeah, so I mean, I'd say traditional tent, and I would say a 2-person tent, because you can sleep in a 2-person tent by yourself. But if you want to go with a friend or your spouse or something like that, then you want to be able to have that flexibility. And I know that not everybody has the luxury of having multiple tents. So that's what I would recommend.
Do you have a specific tent?
I mean, like, so there's a real special place in my heart for the Hornet Elite, because it was my only tent for a very long time. Before that, I had the Big Agnes Fly Creek, and so it had a special place in my heart. But both of those are really tiny, 2-person tents. But I've put 2 people in them a lot of times, and so they do work. But that was before I discovered 25-inch wide pads, and I just thought, this is what it is. This is what backpacking is. You got a tiny tent and you shove two people in here like sardines. So I mean, there's a special place in my heart for that tent, but I don't consider that really a beginner tent, because it's expensive. It's a $500 tent.
Exactly. That's the tough part, is like some of these tents where, like, I'd say like the Big Agnes Copper Spur or something like that, like, be a great tent that someone could probably use for their entire backpacking career. But if they do end up wanting to go down that trekking pole route down the road, then they all of a sudden have a $500 tent that they've purchased. So I think for that reason, like, I really like the REI Passage and Trailmade tents as like kind of an affordable, but they're not lightweight by any means, but they're lightweight enough that if someone's, as long as they're not crushing miles and doing a ton of kilometers per day, then they're going to be a great tent for them. And then I think someone who is going to be doing a lot of miles and it really trying to push kind of their backpacking, then they probably have to go with, I think the X-Mid is probably my recommendation for most people. I know a lot of people too who have, like, first tent they've bought has been the X-Mid 2-person, and they love it. And I think a nice thing about it is they do get that cult that they can go to for advice. They can pitch the tent, post in the Facebook cult group, and get like 1,000 comments with recommendations on what to do. So it's nice to have that. Like you said, they're tough to pitch. You have to be adjusting guy lines and stuff for uneven ground, but you get used to it. Is there a tent that you would avoid? You'd tell, like, if someone came up to you and like, I want to buy a new tent, what should they avoid getting? And maybe it's a tent that you would use if you were to beginner backpacker, but any that you just be like,
yeah. So at first I was like, I don't know that I really have one, but I do. I mean, so basically anything you buy at Walmart, anything you buy at Walmart or Academy. Although I think the exception there would be the Eureka tents. Like, I haven't used a whole lot of Eureka tents, but I do think they make good, solid backpacking tents. But those aren't the ones that people usually buy, because they tend to be I mean, when you're going to Walmart, or Academy or something like that, they tend to be the more expensive tents that those places are selling. And so what they do is they look for the Coleman's or the Outdoor Products, I think is the Walmart specific brand or whatever. So those are the ones that they look for because they're cheap, Like I've bought excuse me, I've bought a tent for $25, I think, at a Walmart because like we forgot something, on a car camping trip or something like that, and my daughter needed it. And so I just go to Walmart and I'm like, $25, there we go, like we'll be good. And but those are the tents that I would probably say avoid those tents. But even then, like when I was first starting out and an expensive backpacking tent was too much money, I remember looking at those a lot because I was like, well, like it's better than nothing, but they're so heavy and they don't, like have you ever seen the rain flies on those things? Like they just, it's almost like a little, yeah, right. It's just up at the top.
Yeah, they're pretty rough. You always have to buy like a tarp and then bring that. And I see that all the time car camping. And I think for car camping, it's a perfectly great way for like $50, $60. Get one of those cheap tents, put a big blue tarp over it, and you're kind of good to go.
But the key there is that you don't have to carry it for one, and you've got an escape plan, So like if it fails or if it starts leaking and all that kind of stuff, then you can bail out in the car. Because I actually have an experience early on. I wasn't backpacking, I was car camping, but it just rained and rained and rained. And we had a tent that we had borrowed from a friend. And it just, it was standing water in the bottom and it was just dripping from the top the whole time that it was raining. And if we weren't able to, because we went and slept at a hotel, the very next night, we just suffered through that one. And we could have gotten in the car if it got real bad. But if you can't do that because you're out on a 2, 3, 4-night trip, that's a big deal.
Yeah, not having that bailout when you're on a backpacking trip and your tent starts failing would be pretty rough. I think for me the MSR Freelight is probably one that I would recommend people to stay away from. And honestly, I haven't used the new Hubba Hubba from MSR, but I know the old version. I really didn't like it because of the way the pole structure worked. It really didn't provide a lot of headroom. You had to be kind of sitting straight up right in the middle, and then if you had a tall sleeping pad, then a tall pillow, the inner would be like inches away from your face, especially if you had 2-person crammed in there. So I think, I think you've used the new Hubba Hubba. Is that?
Yeah. So I'm a fan of the new Hubba Hubba. I like it. It's got the same design as the Freelight, and I'm with you on the Freelight. I think the Freelight is probably the one tent that I would tell people to avoid. Mainly because, and is this the same problem that you've experienced, Justin, is that it leaks? It doesn't leak, but when you open the door, all that water comes in, if it's got any water from condensation or from rain, anything on it like that. And so the Hubba Hubba has that same design, but what I've seen with the Hubba Hubba is that it extends out further. And so when you open that door, even though you're going to have the same problem, it drops onto the ground and not into the tent. It drops into the vestibule area. And because it extends out further too, the sort of rain gutters that it has, so it's got like this like sewn seam on it that they're calling a rain gutter, and it kind of works like a rain gutter, but it hangs differently on the Hubba Hubba than it does on the Freelight, even though it's the exact same design. And so because it hangs differently, it does make a little bit more of a channel, in my opinion, that runs that water away from the door. Whereas with the Freelight, it just comes straight into the tent. And so,
yeah, and I think that's they probably looked at the Hubba, maybe designed the Hubba Hubba first, and because it has that brow pole that extends basically to the edges of the tent, if not a little bit further out, you don't have the door dropping water in. Whereas the Freelight has a really short brow pole, so you have like a foot of the inner tent exposed that just gets water all over it. And even if the door didn't dump water into the tent, with that short brow pole, if it's raining as you get into your tent, you're going to get water kind of dropping on anything that's within that area. So it's, yeah.
So that is true, but but that's also, I feel like that's true of a lot of traditional tents that are trying to get, low weights.
True. yeah, like the Hornet and stuff like that. You probably just have to kind of undo the door a little bit less and then crawl in a little bit to not get rain in there. But I think I know your answer to this one. You kind of alluded to it, but the most innovative tent. And I think there's a lot of ways that we could go about this. We could go the most innovative tent of all time, but I don't know where you went with it. But I think when I was writing that one, I was thinking more of like recent times. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, like, and I did allude to the Dipole, to the Tarp Tent Dipole. And like I said, I mean, there's just nothing else out there. So for me, like, I haven't used a whole lot of Dipole tents. I mean, on the Dipole, I haven't used a whole lot of Tarp tents, mainly because they aren't as willing to cooperate with creators and stuff like that as some of the other tent companies. And so, but at the same time, like, when I'm looking at the tents that they have, there's nothing else out there like them. And so when we talk about how, like, all tents are basically the same, I mean, like, everybody's copying everybody else. When I look at what Tarp Tent has, I'm thinking, like, I don't see anyone else copying this. And with the Dipole, like, I was really impressed. If you've seen my video on that, I was really impressed with that tent. And part of that is because it's so different from everything else that I've seen out there. I mean, they're incorporating some carbon fiber, some short carbon fiber poles to get you a little bit more space at the head and the foot, and then they're using trekking poles and they're using designs. And so, like, the Dipole, like, everybody talks about the X-Men, how it only needs 4 stakes and it's good, and that is true. The same is true of the Dipole, except if you're experiencing some pretty good winds. Probably any wind you would probably need some more. If I'm being honest, you're probably going to need some more stakes. But if it's a relatively calm, night or evening, you can do the 4 stakes and it's going to be fine. And so, but then looking at some of the designs that they have that I haven't even used, I haven't actually gotten my hands, but would like to. They have designs that I don't see anyone else using. No one else is copying. No one else is, trying to do anything quite like Tarp Tent is doing.
I think that might be a little bit due to the patents that they have. I think they're pretty. I don't want to say, like, not necessarily aggressive, but they are very proactive with their patenting of their different ideas. Like, I think some of their strut ideas and tent shape ideas are patented. So maybe that's why we don't see it as much. But I agree. Like, their rainbow series of tents, the Stratospire is one that I've looked at, and I'm like, this seems like a great all around tent as far as very versatile. Like, you can kind of expand it out into the vestibules a bit. You can have they have a sidecar system. If you have like a child or a dog, you can stick them into one of the vestibules. But yeah, I haven't actually checked out any of their tents. I emailed, like, not even kind of as a creator, I emailed a question to them and they didn't even get back to me. So
that's not good. That's not good. And so, and that's one of the problems that I have with them is that, like, I'm very curious about Tarp Tent stuff, but because they don't want to seem to play nice, especially with creators, it makes me withdraw from them a little bit. And so, like, I want to be able to use their tents more often. I want to be able to recommend them because I want to be able to benefit my audience and stuff like that. But Tarp Tent's not making it easy for me to do that. And there's a lot of companies that are making it easy for me. And so I don't know, but yeah, all that to say, even though they don't want to play nice, I still think that the stuff that they're doing does seem to be very innovative.
Yeah, super innovative. And I think that brings us to the most overrated tent, and not necessarily the worst tent, just the most overrated tent.
Yeah, so, like, Justin, you're gonna get me in trouble. That's what you're gonna do. I'm going to make you answer it first. You answer it first, Justin.
All right.
What's the most overrated tent for you?
The most overrated tent for me is the Hubba Hubba, for sure. I go out on trips in the Canadian Rockies, and it's transitioning. It's transitioning to some other tents, but I'd say 50% of tents at kind of the popular campsites in the Canadian Rockies are Hubba Hubbas. And to me, that, like, just, I don't think it's like a terrible tent. I just don't think it's a tent that is worthy of being at 50% of the campsites in the areas where I'm going. I still think it's that good, but it's available. It has a good name. It's kind of like I would say Osprey is a super overrated pack company because anytime I see people asking in Facebook groups for recommendations for packs, people always say, I love my Osprey. And that's the response that they're getting.
Yeah. Okay. So, I mean, when you talk about the Hubba Hubba, that does make me think about the Copper Spur. I think the Copper Spur is a great tent, and I really like it. But I don't. It's a really well built tent, but I don't see why it's as popular as it is when. And this is my bias. My bias is the 25-inch wide pads, and it's only got that 43-inch floor at the foot, and so that's one of the reasons why I'm like, I just don't see the Copper Spur being a true 2-person tent, whereas the Hubba Hubba, although I don't know about the previous Hubba Hubba, but the new Hubba Hubba does have a 50-inch floor, and so like and it's that 50-inch floor, and it's the weight of it that for me made it excel over some of the other more traditional 2-person tents out there. Because you get those 2 wide pads and you get the weight. I mean, so when I said that you were going to get me in trouble, it was probably because, and it's not because I think it's a bad tent at all. And I've gone in with this with Dan Durston before, but the X Mid Pro 2, like I've been publicly critical of that tent a little bit. And the only reason why I would say that it might be overrated is just because of how much hype there is around it. But when we talk about tents that are different, like it is a different tent, and you don't really see a whole lot of stuff out there, that's quite like it. But when it comes down to like a true 2-person tent, that the 2 people can actually use, I just don't feel like it really is. And so, but then you go back to earlier in our conversation where we're talking about the regular X Mid 2, which I haven't had a chance to use. I think a lot of the issues that I have with the X Mid Pro, I don't think I would have with the regular X Mid. And so maybe I need to get Dan to send me a regular X Mid so that so he can stop having an aneurysm every time I say something bad about the X Mid.
I think so, and I think part of that is just like you're not scared to hold companies to their feet to the fire as far as if they're claiming it's a 2-person tent, it's got to be fitting 2 25-inch wide pads in there. And I think you could probably be like in a similar vein, probably put the duplex into that category of with the X Mid 2 Pro of being a tent that it has that doesn't have that width. So I'd say the majority of people are probably using both of those tents as 1-person tents. And I would be surprised that the X Mid 2 Pro seems you use both of them. I think you had a slight. I think some people might say that you had a extreme bias for the duplex, but I watched your video and I'd say it was a pretty even split between the two tents. I think we might see the X Mid 2 Pro kind of surpass the duplex as one of the most popular like through hiking tents for trails like the CDT and PCT. What do you, having used both of them, what do you think?
I'm going to say this, and people are going to say that I'm a hypocrite, and I'm going to try to defend myself. I do think the X Mid 2 Pro is a better designed tent than the duplex. The reason why, and I do think that my perceived bias came off stronger than I think it actually is in the video, or people interpreted it as stronger than it actually is. The things that I was thinking are the things I think the duplex has over the X Mid is it's got the weight, which a lot of people would put up with a lot of stuff to shave, even just a few ounces. And I think, and that's really what I was trying to like zero in on whenever I did that video, was that when you're talking about lightweight tents, I mean, people highly prioritize that. And so it's got the weight, and I like my headroom to be, perpendicular to where I'm facing, whereas the X Mid's got it kind of at the corner like that. And it brings that one wall that we've talked about before down low. And when you have 2 people in that tent, I would rather have the wall sloping, behind me evenly than coming down slow, coming down really hard on one side. And so those are my problems. But all that to say that I've got the X Mid 1 Pro. I had a video that came out recently about that, and I really like the 1 Pro, especially when you're talking about single person trekking pole tents.
Yeah, and I think the things that you mentioned as far as, it was really, I think probably like one one thing with the X-Mid 2 Pro that was a big issue for you. It really goes out the window if people are using it as a one person tent. So it's
like we've said, most people are. So, but that's the thing. It's like for me, and like you said, I like to hold companies to the fire on this. If it says 2 person, it should be 2 person. If it says 1 person, it should be 1 person, etc.
And 2 person in today's modern world, where we're using 25-inch wide, mostly rectangular pads. I would say that's. I think this might be an interesting poll. I might throw a poll up on the YouTube channel, ask people like what size pads they use, because I think it's mostly 25-inch wide, probably regular width or regular length square pads these days. So.
But that's also the thing. Like I would be curious to see what the results of that poll is. But Justin, you and I, like, for better or for worse, we are influencing people, and I feel like I want to be influencing people. Like, if you're not using a 25-inch wide pad, I feel like, kind of like you with the bidets, I feel like you need to be using a 25-inch wide pad. And I feel like companies need to stop making 40, 43-inch floors. I mean, like 50 should be the minimum on a 2-person tent. And I feel like if we put pressure on people like that, I think eventually we'll see that become the norm. And like with the X-Mid Pro, I mean, it's 2 inches. I mean, 2 inches is all that you needed. And it would have been, I probably would have raved about it if we'd had those 2 inches. Although my big stickler on that was the way that the headroom was positioned. I like I said, I like my headroom side to side. So
yeah, that makes sense. And yeah, I think that's the last superlative that I had here that I wanted to chat about. As far as 2023 goes, what are the 3 tents that you're probably like, if you're not testing out gear? Actually, let's just make it 1 tent. If you're not testing out gear, what tent are you bringing out on a trip? If you're, regardless of something that just a dual tent.
So I mean, 2023 is still young, and I haven't had a whole lot of experience with the X-Mid Pro 1. I do really like that tent. I do hesitate with it, like we said, just because it's an extra pole that I got to carry. Last year, I would have said without any hesitation, it would be the Plex Solo, but I am hesitating a little bit this year to say that is my go-to tent. I've been really impressed with the Gossamer Gear, the 1, as I think I alluded to a little bit earlier. But the thing, here we go. The thing with that is it's got a tapered floor, and it goes to 21 inches at the foot. And so if that wasn't true of that tent, I would probably be like, this is the tent, because it's like 18 ounces with a nylon. It's a nylon tent, and it's 18 ounces. And so you got other tents that are using DCF that are having a hard time getting to that weight. And so it's a good tent. And
yeah, I know Kyle on his PCT through hike had issues with it leaking, but I think he had two different ones that leaked on him. The guy he was with, Flossie, had no problems with his, I don't think. And then Kyle got one that they just forgot to seam seal it. And then the second one, it just had like some weird seams where the seam kind of extended outside of where they seam sealed. I think that was the issue. And then it was leaking. So yeah, I'd be interested to see if that was like an isolated incident, but he swore off them after that second time.
Yeah, no, I mean, so I don't, I use a lot of tents, but the amount of rain that I actually see when I'm out is actually not as much as I would expect to see. And so I don't have an extensive experience with tents and rain. But I don't know, I sort of blindly trust some of these bigger companies, even some of the bigger cottage companies. I kind of blindly trust them that I'm expecting their tents to work.
Yeah. And a lot of them, they're testing them in rain rooms and stuff like that. And I'd love to get a rain room. I know we've chatted about our gear testing dreams down the road, but I think most of the time the tents are going to perform pretty well for the most part, unless there's been like a manufacturing defect. And that's just kind of the nature of any outdoor product. There's always going to be manufacturing defects, and we just have to kind of deal with that. And luckily, a lot of the companies have really good warranties and stand behind their products.
Yeah. And I wasn't aware of, cause I didn't follow Kyle's PCT hike very much. And so I wasn't aware that he was having problems with that. But that is interesting. I'm mainly, was mainly looking at it from like just looking at these tents, looking at the way they're designed and all that kind of stuff. And I'm like, this is a good tent that's different from a lot. So
yeah, well, I'm curious to see your thoughts on it. If people want to check you out, I think if people want to complain about the fact that we didn't talk about the X-Mid enough, just head over to Steven's YouTube channel, My Life Outdoors, and you can comment on any video that he has there, just asking what about the X-Mid, and he'll make sure to get some more X-Mid content out there. And Dan, send him an X-Mid 2, regular version,
yeah.
so that he can fall in love with it like the rest of us have.
Yeah.
Any other closing thoughts, Steven?
I got nothing.
All right. Well,
I got nothing. I appreciate you bringing me on. It was fun.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. Thanks for coming on. The beard's looking real good, so keep it up. And we'll talk to you soon.